ISDM simply stands for Indian School of Development Management, but if I have to expand it, it would be more of acceptance, embracing and being inclusive about diverse people and their backgrounds, their stories, and just making everyone a part of a large family or a big family where everyone gets a spotlight some point of their time.
Campus is a great vibe and it encourages collaborative learning, and I feel it is very well utilized. So every space, every room has a name, and the name itself describes the vibe of the room, and it encourages us to engage in discussions which are fruitful for our learning.
We have a lot of different spaces in campus. We have a fun area for the students. We have separate areas for doing group work. We have separate area for pantry. We have a open area which we usually call terrace for all the fun activities or flag hoisting during the Independence Day or Republic Day, so or whatnot. So it is a very vibrant campus with a lot of different spaces, colorful spaces, learning spaces, and that is something which makes student life at ISDM very different.
For the first time when I went to the library of ISDM, I was fascinated by the book ISDM's library has. And these are not just the books, which you see, in the influencer book pages or something. These are books like, which you want to read and that changes your lives kind of books. So the library is amazing.
We have a smart classroom which is hybrid enabled, so students in the COVID times have the ability to actually attend classes from home or on campus.
So 6th floor, the Bajlis, has all the resources which helps us in coordinating online and offline spaces. And it is a space where we can point our opinions, we can ask relevant questions and engage with the faculty and arbitrators.
Life at campus was amazing. The location, on the other hand, is pretty good in the sense that your connectivity is nice, which is why the founders even chose this campus particularly.
Noida has treated me really well. I've been really very safe. Every day I've been commuting from college to my home, and it's a 15-20 minutes distance, but I've never ever faced any kind of issues.
ISDM gave me this energy where I can do things with so compassion, courage, with energy.
Hi, Ravi.
Hi, Mekin. Hi, Amitabh. So good to see people's faces in COVID. आपका चेहरा देख के अभी पता नहीं 2 साल 3 साल हो गया होगा. So wonderful, and thank you so much.
No, thank you for inviting me, and पहले आपको बहुत शुभकामनाएं आज के जन्मदिन की आपकी.
Thank you so much, Amitabh. ऐसे हैं आप? All good?
All well, yes.
Dad's doing fine?
Yeah, he's fine, yes. Are you largely in Delhi or more in Bangalore?
Bangalore में Amitabh. मैं काफी travel कर रहा था, but okay. Mainly Delhi, Bangalore.
Okay. Hi Devanshi, how are you?
Hi Devanshi.
How are you all doing?
Thank you for offering to do this for us, Devanshi. Appreciate that.
No, not at all. I'm very excited to be here. This, I think, should be a great conversation.
IDR got a lot of face time in our event yesterday. It was mentioned a few times.
Well, that's very exciting. How has the event been going so far?
Yesterday, I mean, we were super delighted with how it went. We had over 1,000 people attending and some really wonderful sessions, and it was really good.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Might be prejudiced, but then it was.
Of course. Hi, Amitabh. We haven't met. I'm Mekin.
Hi, Mekin. Hi.
Mekin, पहले शुरू किया था. I'm surprised I didn't include Amitabh in the list of people I thought you should meet and all that. मैं कुछ लोगों का नाम बताया था. Amitabh is like friend, philosopher, guide.
Come on.
And the problem with Amitabh is, his father overshadows him completely as far as I'm concerned. His father is my ultimate go-to person, role model, everything.
So from you, I've heard a lot of stories.
You've met S.C. Behan?
No, I haven't. I have heard about him a lot from you.
Oh, you have to meet him. He is so ahead of his times. I can't even begin to start saying. In fact, ISDM is largely somewhere originated from his mind only.
Hi, Sudha.
And the Bihar family, Anurag ke saath, my first conversations about ISDM was with Anurag also. In fact, a lot of relevance of the Bihar family on ISDM. Oh, I think people have started joining. We're having a very private chat here.
We are actually live right now.
I'm sorry.
But it's good candid moments.
we are live.
Yes, we are live, everyone.
आप कितनी देर में बताने वाले थे हमें?
I was just waiting. I was like, when do I interrupt? Sudha joined as well.
Hi,
Hi, Sudha.
Mukun.
Hi, Ravi.
Sudha.
Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you very much.
Hi, everyone.
And hi, everyone. Hi, Devanshi.
Sorry, Mukund, to interrupt, but we need to start the session. So, open to you.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, just give me like maybe just let's wait for a few more seconds and then we can start.
Ravi, I didn't realize it was your birthday. Happy birthday.
No, that should be kept aside. Thank you, Devanshi.
Particularly when we're live, we must say this again and again.
So I think we can also celebrate Ravi's birthday today.
Yeah.
Cool. So hello and a very warm welcome, everyone. Wishing you all a very good morning. It's a bright, sunny morning over here in the National Capital Region of Noida. And I'm so excited to see all of you over here. We have around 200 participants who are here in this Zoom call and many more who are joining us live through Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So welcome once again to ISDM Presents Target 2030, What Matters, Dialogues on Development Management for Sustainable Development Goals. Yesterday, on 28th January, we celebrated the Development Management Day, which we celebrate on the last Friday of January to cast spotlight on the multiplying effect of development management on the social sector. We had a really insightful discussion on the importance of nurturing quality talent for the social sector. We had a galaxy of speakers who spoke on the importance of why talent matters. And today, we have an amazing lineup of speakers across 3 panels, starting now with the CEO talks. And later in the day, we have Diversity Matters and Philanthropy Matters with keynote addresses by Vrinda Sarup and Sunil Kanmunjal. So today, this session on CEO Talks is a really important one because in this session, we'll be hearing 8 CEOs of top social purpose organizations of our country who will be sharing their personal and professional journeys of creating impact at scale. They will be sharing some current imperatives for social change and also share with us some critical matters that matter as we prepare ourselves for Target 2030 to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Over here, we would also like to share that it is essential that we learn from these leading practitioners oftentimes to guide our way. And this is a rare opportunity for all of us to interact with these amazing speakers. And I hope all of you are as excited as we are. So without further ado, let me now invite the anchor and the moderator for this session, who is none other than Ms. Devanshi Vaid, the co-founder of India Development Review. Let me give you a brief introduction about Devanshi before I hand it over to her. So Devanshi is, as I mentioned, is the co-founder at India Development Review. She oversees outreach, dissemination, audience growth, user engagement, and media partnerships at IDR. Her prior experience includes working as a part of the advisory research team at Dasra and as a news producer at Times Now. Devanshi holds a BA in English Literature from Bryn Mawr College, which is a leading liberal arts college in the States, and has practiced in building out communication and dissemination strategies, as well as in creating digital user-friendly content. We are really excited and grateful to have you as to anchor and moderate this session, Devanshi. So ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Devanshi Vaid. Over to you, Devanshi. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mukund. That I think was an extremely kind introduction. Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here, and to everybody that's tuned in for this conversation, thank you so much for joining us. At IDR, we are very big believers in the power of storytelling and in the ability that knowledge has to drive change. And that's why I'm really excited to be moderating this conversation today. Each of our speakers has been immersed in the social impact space in different ways and I'm working across a variety of themes. And rarely do we get to be privy to this much expertise at the same time. Before we dive into the session, I'll just tell you a little bit about how it's going to flow. This, in part, is for the benefit of those of you who are in our audience, but mostly it's a reminder to our speakers so that they don't go over time. So our session is divided into 2 parts today. Each part consists of 4 speakers who will have 8 minutes to present, followed by 2 minutes to wrap up. After each session, I will be moderating an audience question and answer. These will be at 11:45 and at 12:50 p.m. respectively. So if you've got questions while you're listening, please make note of them or send them in the chat box here, and I'll try my best to get to all of them. If you have questions for a specific speaker, please indicate that as well. The first part of our session today is going to focus on current imperatives for social change. And kicking us off is Amitabh Bihar. Amitabh is the CEO of Oxfam India and the former executive director of the National Foundation for India. His areas of interest include governance and civil society, social action, and government accountability. He is one of the leading experts of people-centric advocacy and chairs organizational boards of several international and national nonprofits and coalitions like Amnesty International India, Navsarjan, and Yuva. Amitabh holds an MPhil in political science from JNU. He was also a research fellow at the University Grants Commission. And today he'll be sharing his views on India at 75. What were our hits and what were our misses? Amitabh, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Devanshi. And thank you, ISDM, for inviting me. I'm absolutely delighted to be here for this conversation. And Devanshi, please do remind me of the time. I do realize that you're going to be very firm on the 10 minutes. So please let me know. So I'm absolutely, excited being here. ISDM is an idea that I've been tracking, and you've done some fantastic work. I also wanted to congratulate you, particularly for your new center on social justice philanthropy. I'm super excited about it, and I really hope that it shapes the philanthropy discourse in this country. So let me start, first very quickly talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, because that's the focus of this. And I was very privileged to be in New York when the Sustainable Development Goals were launched. The environment was absolutely electric. We had the Pope giving a speech, then Shakira sang a couple of songs, and we had almost 50 premiers from around the world, including our Prime Minister, in that hall. And I would say that it's probably the most ambitious global compact we have created. And it is the first time where we were able to bring economic, social, environment together. And this is something that we're all working on together. And I hope that we are able to successfully get at least bits and pieces of the SDGs. But I just wanted to, talk of this very ambitious global compact where I was fortunate to experience that electric environment. But I'm absolutely sure that on 15th August 1947, the moment would have been 10 times more electric. The moment of independence was, I would say, really the embodiment of hope and dreams. And let me just say that it was not just an embodiment of hopes and dreams of Indians, but it was really a global moment, which inspired, let me say, 2 things particularly. One, the idea of decolonization, the idea of independence in the Southern Hemisphere. And the second, I would say, was the idea of how democracy can be operationalized, particularly through citizens' participation, citizens' movement, people's movement. And I think that's where the story starts of the 75 years of India, hits and misses. So Devanshi, I would say 10 minutes is extremely inadequate to talk of something as massive as this. But I just wanted to kind of flag that I think the hits started, the successes started on 15th August 1947 by being able to have a non-violent independence movement, which then galvanized action around the world. let's just remember the most powerful movements after that we've seen, whether it's the Martin Luther King movement in the US, or whether the movement against apartheid in South Africa, were largely inspired by the Indian independence movement. So, I just wanted to take us back there. Let me, say that Indian post-independence, these 75 years, is really a story of hits and misses. It is a story of big dreams, big achievements, but it is also a story of shattered dreams, of continuing injustices. So it's difficult to give you a neat story of 75 years of independence. And I would actually say that whatever is, as they say, the cliched saying on India, whatever is true for India, the opposite is also true for India. And that's what it is for the hits and misses in this country. So what I tried to do is, given that this is, just really telegraphic top line, I have tried identifying 5 specific pieces around which I think we need to look at hits and misses of the 75 years. The first is, I've kind of talked of it, the idea of democracy and the constitution that we have. I think it was an extremely audacious project to have the kind of democratic framework we have and the constitution we have. It was audacious, but let me just say that over the decades, we have been able to, in many ways, do a functioning democracy. And that's a huge achievement. It's a huge achievement that in 75 years, probably we've not seen any other experience in the post-colonial world which has had a robust democracy as we have had. And let me also say that the Indian constitution is so important that pretty much everywhere, go to any law school, they do talk of Indian constitution as one of the most progressive constitutions. And let me say that, the Indian constitution, while it talks of the fundamental pillars of equality, freedom and fraternity, it also brought in justice. And I think that that's huge for any democracy. And we've largely worked with this framework. So I just wanted to talk about how big democracy is, and very often we don't celebrate the democracy that we have and the constitution we have. But let me also say, the misses are that today I feel that democracy is under serious threat. We saw a brief stint in 75, 77, and today we see that those fundamental pillars of democracy are under serious threat. And you're seeing that in terms of declining separation of power. You see it in the form of violation of human rights. There are a whole range of instances that you can look at where you see that democracy is under threat at the moment. So whether you call them a hit or a miss, but it's a battle worth engaging in to ensure democracy. So that's one. The second, I wanted to talk of development. I think, sometimes we feel, and somebody like me who works on issues of development, I'm very impatient. I get angry that we still have 25% of the population living below poverty line. 50%, according to the multi-dimensional poverty index in Bihar, are below poverty line. But let me also give you one, couple of data points which will absolutely, it's stunning that when India became independent, our literacy was just 18%, just literally 18%. And in 2011, it had reached to 78%. So that's a phenomenal developmental journey that we have covered. Very often we forget that, but I think it's important for us to remember that. Let me just give you life expectancy. Life expectancy in 1960 was 39, and now it's 69. From 39 to 69. So it's a phenomenal journey of development. And you look at any indicator, whether it's maternal mortality, whether it's enrollment, in all we have done exceptionally well. But on the other hand, I do think that in 75 years, it is painful to still see 25% people living below poverty line. And the data points are different. We know that there's so much work to be done. And that's the misses. And I do feel one of the problems with SDGs was, and I think that's the problem with Indian policy framing, that we are still looking at the extreme poor. And we are just talking of getting people out of poverty. I think we should have by now shifted our frame to looking at questions of justice, but we have not done that. So the huge developmental deficits and poverty that we continue working with. Globally, 1/3 of the malnourished children are in India. 1/3 of the global poor live in India. And these are startling statistics. We need to work on that. So that's the second. The third, I think, which is quite remarkable, I don't work on it, but I think it's important. The huge progress we made in terms of science and technology and what it has meant for the Indian economy, what it has meant for the Indian people. So it is quite remarkable from 47 when we started our journey and to have the kind of institutions we have. We actually now are a nuclear power. We have been able to go to the moon. These are huge achievements, unthinkable. These were audacious dreams of the freedom fighters that we had, the founding mothers and fathers of this republic, that we are able to do that. But on the other hand, I would say that science has not been an equalizer. Just look at what happened in the last 1.5 years. The digital divide is so enormous that now you're talking of millions of school children actually being deprived of education. Just to give you again one data, it is, there are different estimates, but only 15 to 18% in rural areas have access either to a laptop, computer, or a smartphone. They have pretty much lost this 1.5 years of schooling. And that's the level of the digital divide. On the one hand, I talked of the malnourished. People are still dying of very basic diseases. On the other hand, we have super specialty hospitals and we are doing health tourism. People come from all over the world to get super specialty medical care. So technology is still not democratized. We need to ensure that everybody gets it. How am I doing on time, Devanshi? But
you've got about a minute.
Okay. So then I'll be very quick. Just two more. These are the three. The fourth, I think, in terms of justice, which is one of the founding pillars of our constitution. I think it's remarkable. I was growing up in the 80s. I could not have thought of a Dalit chief minister in Uttar Pradesh. But by 90s, we had a Dalit chief minister. On top of that, a woman in Uttar Pradesh. So we've seen a huge empowerment of the Dalits in many ways. The affirmative action has worked. But on the other hand, Indian story is also a continued story of injustice of Dalits. You still see lynching happening based on caste grounds, based on religious grounds. So justice is something, and particularly the socially excluded, the socially marginalized, the Adivasis still get displaced from their places of habitat just because there's some industry coming up. So the justice story is also, again, a mixed one. And then I wanted to talk of because it's just a minute, that on equality, a fundamental pillar of Indian democracy, of our republic. But you must have seen the Oxfam recent report. When billionaires have doubled their wealth, 84% of Indian population actually has seen a decline in their income. 2 years ago, literally nine people had more wealth than 50% of Indian population. So that's the story about equality. These were the 5 hits and misses. I'll just say, Devanshi, I'll end with that there's this famous Faiz line that wo subah kabhi to aayegi. We need to remember that. We need to work for that. And we must work for that subah, along with that Gandhi's talisman, that ultimately, when in doubt, particularly for the social sector, let's look at the person who's the person who's suffering the most, think of that person, think of the action. Will your action help that person? If it does, I think we'll have a more robust story for 75 years of India. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amitabh. I think very often, especially in the social impact space, we focus on how much work there is left to do, so much so that we forget to take into account how far we've come. So thank you for providing us with that perspective. And of course, also highlighting how much further we do need to go and where the big gaps lie as far as development is concerned. I actually hope that that's a bridge that our next speakers will be able to help us cross. Next, we have Sudha Srinivasan. Sudha leads the Nudge Center for Social Innovation. The organization's mission is to nudge and nurture top talent to solve for India's biggest challenges at scale. The flagship startup incubator ENCO works with early stage nonprofit enterprises to help them succeed. Sudha started her career in the technology sector and spent 16 years at various leadership roles, spanning business operations, engineering, and organizational development. Her passion is in enabling organizations to ramp in scale and competence to achieve audacious goals. She was therefore attracted to the development sector and the immense opportunities it offers for organizations to innovate and grow their impact. Sudha is an engineer and an MBA from IIM Lucknow. Today she'll be sharing her views on India at 270, the role of the social sector. Sudha, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Devanshi. You've asked me to share what would India look like in 2070, and I feel that's just such a difficult prediction to make, because we know that in the next 50 years, we're likely to witness multiple epoch-shaping global events such as the one we're in the midst of. A lot will change in the world. On one hand, humankind is altering the course of evolution through technology and other means. On the other hand, Mother Earth has her own design for what life on this planet will be. It's rather tough to predict and speculate on the vast unknown. I would instead like to talk about the two certain challenges that we will see in this period, the next 50 years. And that's poverty and climate change. And talk more about what we can do in this decade that will irreversibly determine the course of the next 50 years. First, let's talk about poverty. Amitabh did give us a very good view of what that picture has been like. If you've been following the war on poverty, India has done remarkably well in this millennium, lifting several, in some estimates, 270 million Indians out of poverty right up to the point of the pandemic into the middle class. So we have been a growing middle class. We have strong tailwinds. We are young, we are productive, and we've made very steady investments in education, health, infrastructure, industry, and to Amitabh's point, even democracy. And all of this will pay off in the next 50 years. By several estimates, our population pyramid starts looking more and more in the green zone. On education, the statistic is stark, growing from 18% to 78%. And a really shrinking poverty population in percentage terms. The liberal economic policy, industrial growth have been instrumental in reducing poverty, and that is a trend that will continue. But the really stark dimension on poverty is that the absolute number of poor, even through our last couple of decades of rapid economic growth, has remained flat. In the pandemic, the number of people that slipped back into poverty has grown in excess of 100 million. So that's now putting 350 million Indians below the poverty line. Our vulnerability to absorbing sudden shocks, such as the pandemic, had always been in question, and that continues to remain a vulnerability. What this tells is that while markets and while government have reached significant populations and have achieved good success in alleviating poverty, there still is a huge segment that can only be reached by a strong civil society. A civil society that recognizes our collective obligation to those at this base of the pyramid. And we have a huge role to play in changing the story of whether the population in poverty in absolute numbers continues to remain flat, or whether indeed in our lifetime we can end poverty through a strong civil society that has the support of the other pillars of civilization, that's government and businesses as well. Ending poverty in our lifetime is a shared agenda, right? And governments must play that critical role in distributing the nation's resources equitably. We also need governments to provide citizens with a safety net in an increasingly unpredictable world. Industry too has a role to play, and industry must expand its view of value creation. We can no longer run businesses purely focused on short-term economic returns. The new measures of corporate success need to extend to social and environmental returns as well. But most importantly, civil society institutions must take a more prominent role in ensuring that every citizen has the opportunity to benefit from the country's growth story. Every sector of industry has been disrupted by innovation and technology. We need a similar startup energy to solve critical problems of humanity, not just the lucrative ones. Our investments in the development sector today will determine whether or not you and I live to see a poverty-free India in our lifetime. The second big challenge of our lifetime is climate change, and there the story is less encouraging. A higher carbon footprint is the price we pay for economic prosperity. A lower carbon footprint is also necessary for any economic activity to sustain. This catch-22 has to be disrupted, and like poverty, the sustainability of the planet is also a shared goal. Governments overcoming short-term temptations need to invest in green infrastructure and regulate emissions, curb emissions in a manner that slows down the rate at which the world is heating up. Businesses need to innovate and bring circularity in every aspect, down to reuse and recycling of everything that we produce on this planet. Well, all of that is very well understood. Very little is said about the crucial role that civil society organizations are playing in combating climate change. On the mitigation front, the very single most important strategy to slow down global warming is girls' education. This has the potential of avoiding nearly 85 gigatons of carbon emissions by 2050, by some estimates. In educating the girl child and giving her agency over her reproductive rights, civil society organizations are already taking that pole position in saving the planet, and more of that needs to happen. On the adaptive front as well, be it conservation of vulnerable ecological systems, or protection of land rights of indigenous communities, or in promoting sustainable practices and livelihoods like agriculture or fisheries, the social sector has been instrumental in reducing vulnerability, in tackling climate change overall. The investments we're making today in this space are barely scratching the surface. A lot more of this needs to happen if we are to take timely action in a manner that stems climate change and at some point even reverses it. So our work at the NUTS Center for Social Innovation, like Devanshi, you mentioned, is rooted in the belief that the development sector's biggest challenges, in fact, humanity's biggest challenges, can only be solved if capable, committed problem solvers in large numbers show up and make this their life's work. Then everything else follows. The money flows in, the political will manifests, public attention is garnered, and the support grows, but the talent has to come first. So today, if I'm hopeful for India in 2070, it's largely because millennial India is just so much more socially conscious than, say, my generation was. Young Indians are willing to commit to lives and careers of purpose as early as in their 20s. I had to make the switch in my 40s, but it's just so amazing to see people in their 20s make this choice. That's just what the world needs. That's definitely what will set India on the green path, as we near 2070.
Thank you so much, Sudha, and thank you so much for also being within within the time without any prompting at all. So that shed light on poverty and climate change, which are two challenges facing civil society that cannot actually be solved unless they are addressed at scale, which incidentally is the theme that our next speaker, Mekin Maheshwari, is addressing. Mekin is the founder of Udhyam Learning Foundation and the co-founder of the Global Alliance for Mass Entrepreneurship. He is extremely passionate about discovering and unleashing human potential and entrepreneurship. Mekin was one of the early employees at Flipkart, where he played various roles. He was the head of engineering, ran 2 small startups within Flipkart itself, and finally took on the role of chief people officer. Mekin completed his BE from PESIT Bangalore in 2002, and today he will be sharing his views on the criticality of scale for social change. Mekin, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Devanshi. I think in the social sector, my journey is barely 5 years old. And I've often been asked, why scale? So when this topic was proposed by Gaurav, I was excited about sharing why I have been excited about scale, or why does scale drive me? And to me, the question is almost as if you're asking why social change? And allow me to structure my thoughts, allow me to share a couple of pages with you. So why would we want to scale impact? And my answer to you today is not as a technologist, but as a citizen. We would want to scale impact for equity. Like the ovarian lottery is unfair. As a deep believer in karma, I may not question where somebody is born, but what we as a society provide. I feel we have failed. Infant mortality of 35, while the best in the world operate at infant mortality of 5, those 30 additional lives per 1,000 are our responsibility. And if we find a way to be able to improve them, it's an imperative that we scale that. It's an imperative that we take it to all the districts in our country. Potential, what's been referred as the demographic dividend, actively turning out into demographic disaster or dynamite. I think we know about our learning outcomes. We've had the ASA report stare at us in our face year after year without the learning outcomes at grade 5 changing. My friend Ashish shares very humbly, with a lot of humility, having run CSF, that Mekin, we have not made impact on learning outcomes. And I think this site is most visible when you have 1 crore people applying for 40,000 railway jobs. And I don't think we need statistics, because that drive to apply for these jobs, that action that they take, tells us of the wasted potential that they could have had. Shame. I am ashamed of where we are as a country in terms of gender and caste. I think for our female labor participation to fall to 20, when countries around us continue to grow, and for us to not have good answers around it, for us to not be able to change it. And for me, at least on this page, I don't even see significant lights at the end of the tunnel. So I would hope and I would wish that this drives us into scaling solutions that fix things for caste and gender. And finally, because I'm an Indian, 138 crore brothers and sisters. If I were born in Bhutan or in Sri Lanka, I may not have thought about scale. It may not have bothered me at all. But with 138 crore brothers and sisters, I cannot but think about scale. That I have to find ways of creating impact. And so do we all. That'll impact that massive nation that we have. So I hope this page, the need for working on scale is something that I've been able to at least convey, if not convince. And even while we carry the baggage of unaccomplished goals around health, education, gender, and caste, we are staring in a future which has even larger challenges of climate change, polarization, fake news, and more, right? And if we don't learn how to deal with them at scale, I feel like our voice will become less and less relevant, that civil society will have less and less impact on society itself. But I am hopeful because I feel it's possible. It's possible, and it's possible not just in the soul-crushing, industrial, mindless replication kind of way that scale is often thought to be. But it's possible to create many different models of scale that create massive impact. And I'll take the next few minutes to just share a few of them that have really, that I feel have created massive impact. There is what all of us think of as scaling, which is scaling operations and doing more of the same, but doing it better and at higher quality. And Arvind Eye Care is probably one of the most inspiring examples. The book Infinite Vision, and there's another book which will also come on this slide. Those two books have been my deepest inspirations in the development world, a proof of what's possible to do while focusing on the user, being in context, doing 3 lakh surgeries last year, of which 1/3 were free. I think Arvind provides us how can you scale operations and yet be thoughtful, yet be mindful. This is an example that many of you may not have heard of. Matsushita is a school of governance in Japan. And the school is rooted in the idea of service and self-knowledge. This one school has created 1 prime minister, 6 cabinet level ministers and opposition leaders, and 73 local and central government politicians. This school has been the center of change for the politics in Japan. And I feel like that is massive scale impact. If you can create education of this kind, if you can create educational institutions which are rooted in true values that go on to create such large scale impact, because each of those individuals are able to drive significant amount of impact. Role models. I think the work of Dr. Rani and Abhay Bang from Gadchiroli is what led to the Asha worker movement in India starting. And I think I don't have to explain the impact of those Asha workers through all these years and specifically in the pandemic. Similarly, Grameen's role modeling of the self-help group model, which has led to a microfinance industry of about 2+ lakh crores of rupees going into the hands of women rurally, is like, those are examples where one organization has created a role model that can then go on to be replicated at national scale and create much, much higher agency and impact. This I don't have to talk about to most of you. I think the impact of policy change, of the right to information, right to education, the scale at which policy change creates impact is massive. So driving more positive policy changes is another model of scale. Community as a scale model, and while Amul is something that we all know of, and I'm sure most of us use Wikipedia once a day, if not once a week, and that's all community led. That's the power of community in creating knowledge and creating awareness through constant participation and volunteering. And that's something that, those are models in which you can create massive scale impact. Wikipedia, by the way, is a nonprofit, one of the 2 technology nonprofits that I think operate at scale, Signal being the other. The partnership model, I think enough of you know about 108. I'll take a moment to talk about step one, which is barely 2 years old, started in the pandemic along with a volunteering group called Startups versus COVID. Step one has so far answered about 8.5 million free consultations through 12,000 plus volunteer doctors in 21 plus states in over 80 dialects in the country. It's a completely volunteer organization that came together to answer the crisis that COVID was. And it's happened because of significant amount of volunteering and partnerships between public-private enterprises, as well as in just volunteers, doctors, governments, to try and make a change happen. So that, to me, is another model of how can things scale. And finally, technology, which has been an accelerator of change in the world. UPI in December clocked about 8.27 lakh crore rupees being transacted through UPI. That's a little over 8 lakh crores in just 1 month. That's the kind of impact that UPI has had. That big number is, it does not feel really emotional. But what does feel emotional is when you see this QR code, when I see a PhonePe QR code near a dabwala or a coconut seller, and with people doing small businesses and home service. So a technology change that has truly democratized digital payments is something that has been possible. So has internet, so has Geo, and YouTube and WhatsApp have been ways of learning. I think these, as models of scale, offer a lot of opportunity in terms of how can we think about scale. I want to share my personal experience with, how much time do I have, Devanshi?
You're a little bit over.
I am a little bit over. I will then maybe stop with this last thought. Paul Graham is, to anybody in the startup industry, has been a role model. And he has a beautiful essay on do things that don't scale. I would encourage all of you to read it. As somebody who has instigated many people to go and create enormous value in the world through technology, he talks about aspects of joy and being user-centric and taking care of quality and really innovating so that costs fall significantly lower than what they are today. So really pushing the bar and using that to be able to create impact. With that, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Megan, for that. And I'm sorry that I had to cut you off. As we all know, one of the biggest, I think, barriers to scaling is talent. Where do we find the people that we need to do all the things that we need to do? And who better to talk about talent and the future of work in the social impact space than Ravi Sridharan. Ravi is a co-founder and president of ISDM. He's a successful banker who worked across several countries in the Asia Pacific before devoting his life to societal issues back in India. Ravi was a part of the leadership team at the Azim Premji Foundation, working on strengthening the social system in India. After APF, he decided to work for a year in one remote school in a village in Kerala, and eventually decided to do something about a question that was bothering him, which is the need for relevant professional management for social purpose organizations. This led him to starting the Indian School of Development Management, ISDM. Ravi has an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad and a BTech from IIT PHU. Today, he will be sharing his views on the future of work in the social sector. Ravi, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Devanshi. And just so that you know, I don't normally speak so fast. This is only for you. Firstly, let me compliment the organizing team really for slotting me so perfectly after Amitabh, Sudha, and Mekin, who talked about what's broken, what are the big issues, and the criticality of scale. So that's the context in which I'm obviously going to talk. And for all this to happen, Devangshi, like you said, we need talent, and more talent. Just to give a context to what I'm going to talk about, in the last 20 years, our lives have changed unimaginably. And all of you know that. It has been taken over by technology, communication, media, unbelievable interconnectedness, and continues to change our lives on a very rapid basis. I can't even imagine how much more the world will change in our own lifetimes. And I'm sure some for good and some not so. Today, I want to draw your attention to just two things, given the sort of time limit, that I believe will have a huge impact on the social sector and in turn talent in the social sector. Firstly, COVID, the pandemic. The pandemic has been the biggest disaster of our lifetimes. Besides what it has done to significantly change our lives, I believe it will continue to fundamentally change a lot more things in terms of how we do, how we imagine, how we live, how we interact, down to very core and fundamental ideas of life and living. COVID has demonstrated how broken the world is. It has exposed the fracture lines in our society like nothing has done so far. During COVID, it's also become blindingly obvious that the social sector has a super critical role in society. Without a vibrant social sector, the state and markets cannot and possibly will not be able to grasp and engage and address the huge social issues that face humanity. Megan talked about some of those big scale related things. Almost all of them started in the social sector and then, took greater shape through various other means of involving state and the markets. Besides COVID, or rather between COVID and climate change, I really think there is a tsunami happening that is going to change the social sector forever. We will see a huge impact, in my view, on the shape and trajectory of the social sector in the coming decades. Here are some immediate impacts of these two things that I'm talking about, COVID and climate change. Many of you would have heard about the great resignation that's happening across the world. People are all over the world, especially youngsters, are resigning from their jobs in large numbers and resigning from dream companies. And most of them are resigning without another job in hand. That's a trend we've never seen in the past. They're all seemingly looking for far more meaning and purpose in their lives. I think this will drive a lot more people to want to come and work in the social sector. A lot more talent in terms of numbers, in terms of the diversity of people who want to work, the specialization they will bring, and indeed different age brackets and different structures, gig employment, volunteering. There's a lot of that that's going to be happening as far as the talent front is concerned. Many of you would have also heard something that's happening on the business world, which is broadly referred to as conscious capitalism. Since COP26, things like ESG have become very big in the world of business. Sudha talked about how climate change is such an important thing and businesses are really beginning to change. Businesses, I believe, will be putting a lot more of their social and intellectual capital besides the financial capital to make the world a better place. They actually don't have a choice because increasingly in very large numbers, their customers, their investors are preferring to associate with businesses that are far more socially and ecologically responsible. This will also result in a lot more and new kinds of work, if you ask me, in the social sector. The second thing besides the pandemic and its sort of combined effect with climate change for me is inequality. And here, by the way, I'm not referring to the inequality in society and what, for example, Amitabh talked about in terms of 7 people, earning half the wealth of this country, etc., which anyway is one of the biggest failures, if you ask me, in our social construct. But I'm specifically referring to the huge disparity in the scale, scope, size of businesses compared to social purpose organizations. And that is even more stuck. And if you do the math, it's like even that 1% having 50% wealth will be a very different level order. This turbocharged growth in the world of business that has created multi-billion-dollar business, even trillion-dollar businesses today, has left not only a large majority of people at the bottom of the pyramid behind, but also left the entire social sector behind in many ways. And by the way, this is even more dangerous because The hope of those millions lies in the social sector, and the social sector itself gets marginalized. You have a systemic problem at hand. Businesses are becoming bigger, more powerful, and reaching much larger sections of the population than organizations in the sector can even imagine. Today in India, there are more businesses with CSR budget, which is really 2% of their profits, of 100 crore plus, than there are non-profits with a total operating budget of 100 crores. I mean, that's a staggering gap that you have between the business world and organizations in the social sector. The largest consumer goods company in India, which happens to be Unilever, reaches 720 million people every year. The largest NGO in India probably reaches, and that's probably CARE, and I could have this data wrong, reaches about 38 million people in this country. It's a 1:20 ratio you're talking about. I mean, think about it. This should be the other way. Social sector organizations should be reaching 720 million people, because that's the scale of the problem that, Amitabh talked about, that Mekin talked about. So what's causing this huge and increasing gap between businesses and the social sector? Number one, talent. While we get a share of the most passionate people coming to the sector, unfortunately, only a small fraction of the brightest youngsters are still coming to this sector. And we have to change that. And I believe it will change. And I'll talk about why in just a bit, a little bit to do with the great resignation, meaningful lives, etc., etc. The second reason for this gap is the ability on one side and the inability on the other side to leverage the latest inventions and creations of humankind. We have Mekin, for example, who comes from a company like Flipkart, right? How technology, connectivity, big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, communications, etc., have been leveraged to bring so much good services, etc., by the business world to the largest businesses in the world. The Googles, the Amazons, they are all big data companies. They work technology, they work data, they work artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. That's a huge gap. There's a digital divide among people who can use and not use. There's a bigger digital divide between the social sector and the world of business. We need to figure how we close that gap. And the third is what Mekin said so beautifully, the ability to do things at scale. And this is, very much the work that ISDM is focused on, the ability to bring together and manage large numbers of people, large sums of money, huge processes, networks, etc., to work for a better world, bringing behavior change communication, bringing research and cutting edge work on that front, people management, innovative finance. We need to bring all this. And that's very much like I told you where, ISDM is working. Given all this background, I really believe that the sector is going to see a huge shift in the coming decades. Given the importance and the recognition of the importance of the sector, the fact that this world will never progress without a really vibrant social sector, I believe the sector is going to see a huge shift and become, I won't say equal, but a more equal player in the ecosystem of Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar. And how will that happen? A profile of talent that will come into the sector is going to change significantly. Monies that is going to come into the sector is going to change significantly, not just in volume, but also the type of money. I believe social purpose organizations going forward will look very different and will change from the stereotype image, which very often, people sort of derogatorily call the chola wala sort of a look, to what I believe will be a laptop wala. I don't see why we shouldn't be putting all that to work for better education, better public systems, and so on and so forth. A lot more influence, I believe, of management ideas, designs, but specifically for the sector. You can't take up just, pick and place here and hope that management work. No, this requires a lot more understanding of humanity, understanding of society, understanding of the complex intersectional nature of social challenges and multiple aspirations. A lot more, I believe, of crossing over of ideas between Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar. Which somewhere increasingly there is a divide. It seems like there are three pillars and they're all sort of insular. But I believe a lot more, osmosis will happen. There'll be a lot more porosity. And in turn, a cross-pollination of business management, public administration, and development management. In summary, what is the future of talent going to look like? Social sector is going to appeal and attract a lot more talent in the future. Inflow of money into the sector is going to significantly increase, and in turn, I believe pay scale, which is such an important driver for getting good talent into the sector. Three, social sector, I believe, will see a lot more professionals in management disciplines, and with some prejudice, given that I come from ISDM, I'd like to believe that development management professionals will play a significant part of the future of talent. And I believe you're going to see decades of unbelievable progress going ahead, because some of the biggest changes have happened after the biggest catastrophe. World War being, a great example. And I do believe that the pandemic is going to create a new world and a significant ecosystem for the social sector. I know I'm 6 seconds over, so thank you very much, Devansh.
Thank you so much, Ravi, and thank you for catching before I needed to interrupt. It's always very interesting to think of the changes happening within the social impact space and how they're going to shape the sector as a whole. And overall, I think, what an incredibly positive note to end on, thinking about the talent that's coming in, the funds that are coming in, and of course, the progress and the impact that the mix of those will invariably drive. I think on that note, I think we can begin our question and answer session for this round. I am going to try, we've got a lot of questions as each of you was speaking. I'm going to try and take as many as we can, but I will begin to address them. The questions have been addressed to specific speakers. So to start with, for Amitabh, we have a question from Pragya. How do we strengthen the pillars of democracy as civil society and citizens? The tail question of which is, how do we build the solidarity between and among civil society, which sometimes continues to operate in silos amidst a competitive environment?
Thank you, Pragya, and thank you, Devanshi. As in just to say that I have, I really loved the 3 presentations that I heard after me. So thank you, all of you. On this question, I would just say that we need to recognize that the kind of democracy that we have envisioned has got limited to an institutional form of democracy. And we've kind of limited it to 1 day of voting. So once in 5 years, we become a democratic society. And the remaining days, we are not necessarily democratic. So just to make it short, how do we look at democracy as work in progress? Democracy is about building it brick by brick. So it has to start from within the family. You cannot have a completely patriarchal family system and then say that in external society, we're going to be living in a democratic setup. So it is going to be a tough journey. It is about, using the feminist dictum that personal is political. I would say personal has to be even democratic. And that's how you gradually build it, from family to caste to community. It just goes on. And it's going to be a long task. The government needs to understand what it means, from creating different forms of democratic engagement. So from pre-legislative deliberation to social audit. So 1 day of voting is not enough, to some moments of referendum, etc., etc. So it's going to be a long haul, but we need to work on that. The civil society getting working in silos is a huge problem. And I think we need to come back to the fundamentals of why we are working. I do really believe that the way we organize or getting into civil society brands or civil society organizations is just a way of organizing ourselves. It is about how do you organize for more efficient impact? How do you organize yourself for building greater democratic, equitable society? And that's really the objective. If we are very clear about it, it will not really matter who's working on education, who's working on health. It is essentially an integrated worldview that needs to be brought in again and again. And on that, particularly somebody like Ravi, I would really urge, how do we ensure that we look at development in society as one whole? These are not about siloized pieces of work or even brands. As in an entity like Oxfam, and you talked of CARE, we do a lot of branding. There is a problem in that, because then the funding gets connected to that. We know what the multiple layers come around that. But essentially, it's an integrated view of changing society, of creating, I'll just say, go back to the founding ideas of our constitution. It's fantastic, and it can inspire us to work together. I know the time is very limited, so I'll stop here.
Thanks, Amitabh. And it's actually something that we've been thinking about at IDR as well. What does a brand for the social sector as a whole look like? What does it mean to push to build that narrative, and what will it take to do something like that? Our next question is for Sudha. It's from Tenzin. Recently, the UN has been stressing upon localized solutions for adaptive and mitigation measures for the fight against climate change. But many times, local communities are excluded from the decision-making process. So how do we strengthen their role in being agents and local stewards for climate action?
Yeah, it's a funny thing that we think in binaries when it comes to climate change. It's something or something else. When the reality of the challenge is that it is at all levels, starting first with the individual. For each of us to introspect on how we lead our lives and to make sure that we measure our own personal net worth, not just in the wealth that we have, but also in terms of the carbon footprint of our lives and how we have contributed to social good in our lifetime, right? So the sense of net worth has to be more than just wealth. It has to be all of these other dimensions as well. And for us, therefore, to use these metrics to change the way we live, and then therefore how we influence how our communities function, how our cities function, how our country functions, and eventually how the world functions, because climate has not known barriers of borders, either international or states or cities, right? So it's something that has touched all of us equally, whether we come from privileged or underprivileged backgrounds even. So yes, very good point, Tenzing. I think it's all about finding that agency and the ability to act. And for players in climate change to distribute that ability to combat climate change rather than distribute solutions. We're all in it together, and I think that needs to start to show in the way we function.
Thank you, Sudha. Our next question is for Mekin. It's from Aruna. Mekin, the question is, what are your thoughts on the metrics we are currently using as a country to report our progress on the SDGs? Are we using numbers that will truly help us move towards equity and justice, or are we creating a mirage of success on certain parameters?
Wow. It's hard to talk less on this, but I think I'm actually going to go back and maybe bring some insights from the internet world and technology world of how metrics are used, how data is used. One of my early lessons at Yahoo back in 2003 as a data researcher was averages hide. Averages hide everything. And especially where there are polarized distributions, where the distribution is very wide, averages actually are a great measure or a great way to hide something, to hide the true story. Most of the metrics that we use nationally are averages. We need to shift to starting to use at a minimum medians, but ideally percentiles or quartiles or tensiles, right? That, hey, this is the 90th percentile or this is the 10th percentile. So when we say our per capita income is now, what, about $2,000? Our per capita income is not $2,000. That is the average of the total income in the country divided by our population, of which 50% is held by 9 people. So it tries to give the world a flavor that, oh, Indians live at $2,000, and they don't. Right? So I think that's the first piece that we need to move away from. I feel a second piece that we need to do a lot more of is to start differentiating between what is measurable and what is important. We focus a lot of our energy on what is easy to measure, and that gets measured. So as a result, we have class 10th pass rates or class 12th pass rates, and those are the measures that we have. What's much harder to measure is like, hey, how do these people do in life, right? And even simpler, maybe measurable, but slightly harder stuff in terms of, hey, economically and socially, how do these people do? And can we hold our educational institutions accountable for their economic and social success? And can that be a learning loop? Can the educational institution then learn from that, hey, I need to do more on economic success of some of my students, or of this sect of my students, or this gender of my students, and start taking action and improve? Like, when will our educational institutions start to learn? So I feel that there is a lot of room for us to start using data well in things that are important. Sorry, I will stop.
No, thank you. And thank you for drawing attention to the distinction between measuring what is important versus measuring what is easy to measure. Ravi, our next question is for you. It's from Devika. Social purpose organizations are the need for the hour today. How can we change the narrative for more youngsters to contribute to the demands of this sector? Or, and this is my addition, sorry, it's not Devika's, what are we doing currently to change the narrative, if you think something is already being done?
Yeah, Devanshi, I'm going to keep it really short because I've seen, Shankar, Sohini, Shobini, and Gaurav are all here for the next set. But to answer this question from Devika, I mean, we need to make the sector really exciting. It needs to be sexy. It needs to be cool. It needs to be awesome. People would want to go there. I think we need to also make it fun. I mean, it's a combination of all that we need to bring into the social sector. And I'm telling you, that's what is going to excite people. And because they're having fun, it doesn't mean that they're not serious about social issues. They're very, very serious about social issues. Sometimes we, have this, I don't know, something from my previous parents' generation, which is, you have to be serious about things. So you can also have fun and do these things, and that's a very important point, I feel, for the social sector. Number one. Number two is that we need some wow brands for the youngsters, brands of organizers, the Oxfams of the world, the Udyams of the world. We need brands that excite youngsters, and we need institutional brands. I'm going to say ISDM, obviously, but, we need brands like that in the country that inspire youngsters to say, wow, I want to go and study there. I want to go and work there. That's very important. And people don't always make choices because, there's a lot more money. I remember many youngsters used to say, I want to go and work in Google because they have free Coke dispensing machines. So we need to make it cool. I mean, I want NGOs to have free Coke dispensing machines. Or maybe Coke, we can have an Indian drink, right? We should make it cool. So that would be my short answer. And the very other point is that if a youngster wants to work on the most complex problems and solve problems that have a lot of relevance and meaning to society, you can't find a better place in the social sector. People think you should become an investment banker because that's where the complicated. No. That's 1/100th of the complexity of problems you will solve in the social sector. So anyone who's excited about solving problems, come to the social sector.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to the grant proposals now that have a line item that says we need free Coke vending machines in our office to attract talent. Circling all the way back, Amitabh, our next question is for you. It's from Girish. It says, currently we are facing majoritarianism. Are we losing the constitutional value of justice or equity?
There's absolutely no doubt, and that's what I was talking about, that democracy at the moment in this country is under serious stress. And we are seeing majoritarianism, which is completely changing the public narrative. And that's evident in the multiple things we do, from the narratives in the media. And I would actually say that, we have, at least as social sector, we're kind of reluctant to talk about some of these issues because they have become fairly explosive issues. The condition of Muslims at the moment in this country is something which is which should be really at the center of a lot of our conversations, and we are not talking about it. And yes, therefore, that's happening. And how does the social sector go back to the basic ideas of building fraternity? And I do think in our constitution, you would look at the three ideas of freedom, equality, justice, and fraternity. But we have not talked enough about it. Fraternity is something that we have not done enough on. So that's really the path, and we'll need to go back to that. You cannot have religious fundamentalism define the politics of this country. And it is something with which we need to engage. Otherwise, I feel that a lot of huge gains that I was talking of, and many others have talked of, will be reversed if we are not able to rebuild a society which is built on on compassion, on humanity, on love, on the idea of sisterhood, we are looking at a very, very difficult future.
Thank you, Amitabh. And I think we have 2 minutes left. So Sudha, this last question is for you. It's from Asim. The question is, do you think we should come up with a solution at a smaller level first? This is for climate change. So for example, solving pollution problems in big cities, successfully solve it, and then scale up globally by replicating earlier successes. And the note after says, climate change meetings do not seem to be helping.
Correct. Yeah, so I think that's where the answers kind of lie in the infrastructure that sectors like the social sector, including climate change, have. We do not have enough platforms for discovery, for learning from each other, for even figuring out what works and therefore what can be scaled. Signals of a sector that needs investment from all quarters. One of the things I did say was what we make by way of investments today will chart the course of what the next 50 years will look like. So how much do we spotlight climate action in mainstream media? How much do we talk about it? How much talent do we draw to this fundamentally critical problem that affects all our lives is kind of important. And I think starting small is good, but it has to be complemented with these other enabling ecosystem attributes so that the good ideas are adopted widely and the scale manifests down the line. Agree with you that top-down approaches have not worked, and hence a lot more needs to be done bottom-up.
Thank you. And actually, I think that wraps us up for the first round of this session. So Amitabh, Ravi, Mek, and Sudha, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming here and sharing your views with the audience and with me. I personally learned a lot. So I think I can safely say that so did everybody else. Mukund, I think should we transition to the second? So we'll transition to the second part of today's session. Bye everyone, thank you so much. Starting off the second part of our session today, our first speaker is Shankar Maruwada. Shankar is the co-founder and CEO of AkeStep Foundation, a philanthropic mission that he co-founded in 2015, along with Nandan and Rohini Nilekani, to improve basic education for 200 million children in India. Shankar has more than 25 years of experience across corporate, entrepreneurial, nonprofit, and government sectors. This cross-sectoral experience and interdisciplinary approach has been a driving force in pursuing scale solutions, innovations, and collaborations for AkeStep's education mission. Shankar is deeply passionate about data, research, and leveraging technology for large-scale transformation in society. He was a part of the startup team at Aadhaar and was actually also responsible for naming it. He's an alumnus of IIT Kharagpur and IIM Ahmedabad. And today, Shankar will be sharing his views on tech for social change. Shankar, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Devanshi. Good morning, everybody. Great listening to the earlier panel. My deep interest in using technology for social change began more than 10 years ago, when I was part of the startup team at Aadhaar. Since its launch, it's had a big impact on India. More than 1.31 billion digital identities issued, which are Aadhaars. In 2014, Aadhaar was used as a building block on which the Jan Dhan program was initiated to increase the financial inclusion in the country. As a result of which we went from 20% of our citizens having a bank account in 2008 to upwards of 80%. This effort, which took 10 years, would have taken peer countries 47 years to achieve, as per an international study. That's how much we leapfrogged because of using technology wisely. Building on Jan Dhan and Aadhaar, and creating the Jam Trinity, including mobile as the third pillar, India initiated a massive program of direct benefit transfers. Currently, around 54 ministries of the government of India in around 320 schemes use digital benefit technology for directly transferring public wages, social sector subsidies to around 800 million Indians. And this technology-based infrastructure came very much in handy when the COVID came, when this could be used to transfer almost $10 billion worth of assistance to the poor, including 200 million women to whose bank accounts the money could now be transferred directly. 2015, launch of UPI. Within 6 years, India went from being a laggard in digital payments to a global leader, overtaking US and China. It is a common sight in streets to see vendors prominently displaying their QR code where you can pay digitally and buy coconut or whatever service. CoWIN, the COVID vaccination platform launched last year, has issued more than 1.65 billion digitally verifiable vaccination certificates. Diksha, the national platform for school education launched by the Ministry of Education, and which Ekstep was proud and honored to be involved with, has clocked more than 42 billion minutes of learning in the last 3 years and has more than 200,000 digital pieces of content in more than 32 languages. In all of these, not only has India gone from a laggard state to catching up and then leapfrogging, countries around the world are looking at, admiring India's experiences of using technology for the social sector and trying to replicate parts of it. In all of this, technology played a crucial role. Why is that? In answering that, let's look at the nature of technology. What technology does, which is important for social change, is it provides people, institutions, and individuals certain capabilities. Digital payment as a capability, verifying your vaccination as a capability. It provides these capabilities which people want. In fact, I would go so far as to say it is people and institutions who disrupt using technology and not technology as a disruptor. Second, for the scale and diversity of India, technology should be thought of as only a component, never the full solution. Just one piece of the puzzle, the bricks in the house, the engine in the car. Other components are also needed, very important. Components like policy, law, financial resources, human resources, processes, institutional structures. And third, the nature of technology itself as a component. The smartphone that you would have with you itself is a bundle of many components, many building blocks. And each building block is evolving rapidly, becoming more and more sophisticated. In the next 10 years, technology will create disproportionate value, and we can leverage it for social change if we use it judiciously, wisely, because technology is a great slave, but can be a bad master. Gazing into the future, two things are clear to me. One, as a society, we will always have problems. You solve one problem, the next one presents itself. We solved the problem of schooling 15 years ago, and we were suddenly staring at the problem of learning. We have a learning crisis in the country now in education. We solve for development. We're now staring at the problems of sustainability and climate change. That's the nature of society. There will always be problems. We will always be striving to solve them. But the nature of technology in the coming years, it will play an increasingly important role, and it will become more and more integrated with society. So society will influence the development of technology, and technology will influence what happens in society. To conclude, as we enter India's 75th year of independence, we have the opportunity in the next 25 years to redouble our efforts to solve for both growth, development, and equity, to realize India's aspirations, India's potential. And in this, technology can help us play a very important supporting role. And the next 10 years, if one were to go by the developments of the last 10 years, the next 10 years are particularly exciting. And the efforts we make in the next 10 years will allow India to leapfrog over the next 25 years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shankar. And thank you for highlighting the fact that we're hearing more and more of today, which is often overlooked, and that is that technology is a component of the solution and not the solution itself. Our next speaker is talking about another very important component of the solution, data. So we have Shobhini Mukherjee. Shobhini is the executive director of JPAL South Asia's regional center, covering over 16 Indian states and partnerships in Bhutan and Nepal. JPAL's network is of over 100 researchers from universities across the world who use randomized evaluations to evaluate the impact of programs and policies to reduce poverty and ensure that policy is informed by scientific evidence. Prior to JPAL, Shobhini worked at Pratham, a pan-India nonprofit initiative working towards universal quality primary education for the underprivileged. She is on the board of directors at Care India, a large nonprofit in India focusing on the empowerment of women and girls. Shobhini holds a master's in social research methods from the London School of Economics and Political Science, with a concentration in development economics and social policy. Today, she will be sharing her views on data for social change. Shobhini, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Devanshi. I have a very short presentation to sort of aid what I'm going to be speaking about. So I'm going to quickly present that as well. Share that as we speak. Okay, super. Okay, so I have actually been asked to talk about not only data for social change, but one of the briefs for me was to sort of bust some popular myths in this sort of in the development sector when you're thinking about the impact of data and looking at how do you sort of look at data for social change or social good. So I'm going to start by sort of reflecting upon the fact that every year sort of billions of dollars are spent in aid across the world in programs to alleviate poverty. And we also give, I mean, you give, I give, we all give for various causes to what we think is helping others. So how do we know what we are donating to or giving for has the intended benefits to those who need the most? And who need the most support, who need the most push to go to the next level. So what can we do? Do we simply give aid and hope and pray that something comes from it? Impact becomes even more important here to understand if we are making a visible and tangible improvement to the lives of the poor through programs and interventions supported by aid. Alleviating poverty would be mere guesswork with good intentions if we don't use data and science to rigorously test programs to know which development efforts help and, most importantly, which hurt. So how do we typically take these decisions? There's a bit of everything in the mix, as you would know, some intuition, some instincts, some ideology, sometimes even ignorance, I would say. Surprisingly little is known about what works, and a lot of decisions are taken based on intuition and first principles, especially when it comes to development and decision making. So let's take the present situation. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a prolonged public health crisis, among other things. The challenges of low human development indicators, poverty, poor public health infrastructure, low levels of education, population density, all of these compound the threat of a very highly infectious pandemic. And in these circumstances, it is even more vital that we pick the right policies to curb the disease. So the immediate resolution of the COVID-induced health crisis has required the medical research community, for instance, to come together to develop vaccines. And vaccine development has been achieved through the process of rigorous randomized controlled trials. Very large word to use, but this science that has been used for vaccine development is the same science that we at the Poverty Action Lab use for the development sector to explore some very fundamental questions of how to improve institutional responses to some of the world's most critical questions around poverty alleviation and improving public service response. So this is taking, the spectrum of how you look at what data you collect and how do you use that data and how do you take decisions based on that. So we are asking questions like, how do we reduce the spread of COVID-19? Or how do we use behavioral nudges to adjust attitudes towards vaccine uptake or observing social distancing protocols? The result of research, what we would call impact through rigorous trials on these questions, can provide important insights to policymakers on measures that can help reduce the spread of the pandemic and lessen its economic impacts. So, for example, there's a lot of evidence now from a very large trial in West Bengal that shows persistent messaging and using sort of what they call celebrity videos on COVID-19 prevention over and above what the government was already doing, increased symptoms reporting and adherence to preventative behaviors among 25 million recipients, with similar effects that were seen on the non-recipient members of their communities. So this is how you're being able to use data and a research for impact at scale. So in some spaces, we are seeing this, and people responding to evidence, of course, and some these messages. So in some space, we are seeing this shift in responding to data for decision-making at a micro level, but also at a policy level. And the need to develop solutions to tackle these deep and persisting impacts across the globe has now brought science and evidence to the forefront of several conversations. So I'm going to argue that the development sector is not just about good intentions, but gradually over the years has adopted a more scientific and data-driven approach to decision-making and impacted millions of lives across the world through scaling up of evidence-backed programs. So innovators and researchers are now thinking differently about solutions, with organizations with feet on the ground about how to deliver these solutions, and most importantly, focus on measuring the impact. So I'm going to quickly illustrate a very simple point. So let's take the example from education. In India, before 2020, and before the pandemic, over 96% of children in the ages of 6 to 14 were enrolled in school. And yet, according to the ASA report, only half of kids in class 5 are able to read grade 2 text. And solve simple multiplication problems and division. So you fast track to 2022, and we're going to see an even more stark learning losses when schools reopen, given that a large population has been left out. So how do you improve learning outcomes? How do we help children catch up? So over the last several years, many things have been tried, from hiring teachers to reducing the pupil-teacher ratio, improving infrastructure, giving midday meals, textbooks, all of these things, right? So as an education minister, I want to know which of these has had the maximum impact and for what value. So my bang for the buck, and quickly deploy them in the current context. So we have now a research base over 1,000 evaluations, a quarter of which is in the education sector alone, which has thrown some surprising results in terms of where we should drive our decisions to invest our money in, actually busting several popular myths that have found their way into government policies in the past. And the big lesson here is that there is little to no benefit of adding resources such as introducing more teachers in a classroom or upgrading libraries or building toilets for girls. So these are all necessary but not sufficient to improve our learning outcomes. So we have done flip charts in Kenya, flexible grants in Niger, libraries in India, textbooks in Kenya. So all of them had no impact on test scores. So, and technology, for instance, is important, but it's not a silver bullet. It has potential, but it's not a silver bullet. Studies have shown that providing access or increasing usage of technology alone is not enough to boost learning outcomes, but programs have to integrate technology into the learning experience of the child, which can then increase learning. The most compelling and evidence actually on improving learning is from a series of experiments around tailoring pedagogy to the level of the child, irrespective of the grade and curriculum. That has found to be consistently effective. And this was first conceptualized by the NGO Pratham, and then is now being scaled up in India and Africa in partnership with Pratham. And so this is even more, such an evidence-informed model becomes even more important in sort of today's context of long school closures. I'll talk very briefly about another myth. This is a good favorite example of mine, tackling absenteeism with biometric attendance. So you can see governments all over are using biometric attendance to track absenteeism. So in Karnataka, the government introduced a biometric device to monitor and enforce attendance of doctors and nurses. And the researchers found through a large trial that they conducted of the program that health gains were achieved through the tracking device, which also had the health data of the patients, and it recorded the attendance of doctors and nurses. But the biometric technology alone by itself did not increase doctors' attendance at the primary healthcare centers. So based on this evidence, the government of Karnataka actually decided to roll back the program, saving taxpayers millions of dollars. So this is an example of how, the importance of data to understand how the system works as a whole, and paying attention to the human factor in the policy design. So there are a lot of very interesting behind the scenes monitoring data that was collected that showed exactly why it failed. So I don't have the time to get into it, but it's very, really interesting once you sort of unpack the why of something not working. So So I want to now focus the last sort of 2 minutes or 3 minutes I have on some broader key takeaways. So what I've done, for instance, is to bust a myth in terms of learning, bust a myth in terms of technology, but I want to now what is the broad takeaway here? The broad takeaway here is first, measurement, data, and evidence are changing how we understand and address problems related to poverty, and through some of the examples I mentioned. And policymakers, practitioners, and funders worldwide are increasingly applying this learning to social programs and policies. So the results have often provided counterintuitive lessons and challenge to status quo. And on some questions, a compelling body of evaluations have generated clear lessons that have fundamentally shifted policy debates across the world. Second, well-designed evaluations can provide insights into not only whether a program works or not, but also why. And in addition to learning about the impact of a particular program, we can draw out sort of the mechanisms of the success and failure. So to help sort of derive lessons, general lessons that can be applied also in broader contexts. So I'll talk about the broader context now. So, having timely and relevant data from the ground to inform decisions is important, but it's not always a necessary condition in using evidence to inform your policy decisions. Global research and evidence can play a key and timely role in affecting national policy. We believe in investing in data systems and in collecting local primary data, but we also equally value the data collected elsewhere in the world and evidence generated through rigorous research to draw on global knowledge for solutions that can work in our context. So whether you take it across states in India or you take your learnings outside of India. So we call this using a practical generalizability framework, wherein policymakers or practitioners can use these lessons to inform and design a broader spectrum of programs and policies. Taking us back to the education example that I'd mentioned, through a series of randomized evaluations in India, Ghana, and Kenya, researchers learned that when children are behind in school, there are a range of cost-effective strategies based on insights of regrouping students by their current learning rather than by by their age. So governments and organizations in other contexts, such as in Zambia, have been able to apply the general idea of teaching at the right level to inform the design of their own remedial programs. So this cannot be done by a few organizations. I think the previous speaker, had mentioned something. I think it was Sudha who was mentioning that there needs to be a platform to be able to learn from each other. There's plenty of space for philanthropy to draw on a host of ideas to inform future investments. And there's a space for think tanks and universities to partner with governments to draw insights from across the world to inform local policy decisions. This is a long-term project, I believe, of creating a true global network that's moving towards a data-driven and impact-focused ecosystem to build foundations towards achieving our next set of global goals. And that is the only way I believe that we'll be able to achieve our targets. While we are learning from the rest of the world is also learning from us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shobhini, for that. And thank you for shedding some light on where we are with data and also, where we need to be. Our next, apologies, I didn't realize my video was still off. Our next speaker is Sony Bhattacharya. Sony is a social change enthusiast who has more than 25 years of experience in the social sector. She is the CEO of Breakthrough, an international organization working to create a cultural shift and make discrimination and violence against girls and women unacceptable. Prior to Breakthrough, Sony co-founded a gender resource center, worked directly with grassroots communities, and built market artisan interfaces for a national nonprofit. She spent 10 years at Ashoka Innovators for the Public and also worked as the India strategy consultant at the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network for its crucial first 3 years of launch. Sony has a master's in English literature from Javadpur University, Kolkata, and is passionate about crime fiction, cooking, and handlooms and travel. She will be sharing her views on social and behavior change campaigns for impact at scale. Sony, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Devanshi. Since I have very little time, I have put together a very small presentation, which I will share with you all, and we'll try and stay within the time limit. Give me a minute. Great. Social behavior change communication, what are they, and why do we need to actually talk about them? Social behavior change communication, or SBCC, as we commonly refer to it, refers to the coordination of messages and activities across a variety of channels to reach multiple levels of society, including the individual, the community, the services, as well as policy levels. One of the very frequent examples of social behavior change communication is the pulse polio campaign called Do Boond Zindagi Ki. You must remember Amitabh Bachchan, was the face of the campaign, and many, CSOs and government machineries were actually involved in eradicating polio from India. The campaign ran for many, many years. Closer home, I'm going to talk about two very interesting campaigns. One is Navrangire, which is a 26-episode television drama that actually sought to build awareness and shift attitudes and practices around fecal sludge management, or how you manage your shit. It was a partnership with the government of India, with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Viacom 18, which an entertainment company, Ashoka University Center for Behavior Change, and it was produced by BBC Action Media, which is a global organization focused on social behavior change communication and is an expert at that. It reached about 59.6 million people. And what it did was that it actually made people call out the insanitary practices of your neighbors in managing, fecal sludge. And 37% of the viewers said that they will do something about fecal sludge management after watching the serial. A lot of resources, but what is very important to focus on this is the partnership. Coming to Breakthrough, in 2008, Breakthrough launched a campaign called Bell Bajao. It asked men and boys to stand up and take action on violence against women by a simple act like ringing the bell. Bell Bajao became a metaphor for taking action the world over. The campaign was copied in 9 countries, including China. It was in Mandarin. We reached 243 million people in 2 phases in partnership with the government of India. And even now, many, many years after the campaign has run, there is request for that campaign from many social sector organizations, many government organizations from outside also approach us for that. The thing is that at scale, SBCC has to be simple, sharp, tested, evidence-based campaign design that is easily replicable. You can do it. I mean, if you looked at the campaign that they copied, the Bell Bajao campaign that they copied in Malaysia or China, it was such an easy job to just transfer because some of the milieus are also quite similar. It has to be sustainable, engaging messaging that runs for a long time. For Bell Bajao, we ran it from 2008 to 2013. Pulse polio, you all know, ran for a long time. So it has to be sustainable and over a long time. And there has to be testing done, across the various intervention platforms. And you can use a combination of platforms. You can use you can use mass media, television, radio, all of that. You can use mid-media, which is like a video van or a rickshaw that goes through the villages, talking about the campaign and the messaging. You can use ambient media like hoardings and billboards, wall writing that's done a lot in villages, and of course the omnipresent social media that is now available to all of that. What is at the heart of SBCC? Human behavior. That's at the heart of Individuals act according to culturally influenced identities. and the social hierarchies. Just for an example, when we worked in early marriage in Jharkhand and Bihar, even if the parent of one girl were progressive enough to think that I will wait till my daughter turns 18 to get her married, the feeling in that family was that the community expects you to behave in a certain way. And that is why you think the community expects you to get your child married early. Not, and what will the community say if the girl's sitting at home not doing anything, right? So you get the girl married early. It's a very complex, culturally induced behavior. And that is why you need a long time to actually change that behavior. And if you do not change that behavior, things might go well for a few days and then you revert back to that kind of a behavior. SBCC is grounded in evidence. You have to create evidence at the onset of the campaign. You have to work on a basis of existing data and follow a very systematic process. You have to analyze the problem in order to define barriers and motivations to change and design a comprehensive set of very tailored interventions across all the platforms that I just mentioned. One of the things that we must remember is a socio-ecological aspect of SBCC. What does that mean? A social ecological model is really something that takes into account an individual who usually act in the context of their families, their communities, their societies, the market, that entire Bazar Samaj Sarkar. And if you put that individual in that Bazar Samaj Sarkar, the behaviors are different. The way I behave as a CEO of Breakthrough is not the way I'm behaving in this panel, right? But there are different kinds of, behaviors. Effective SBCC interventions will simultaneously facilitate change in the social, physical, market, and policy environment so that the behaviors will be promoted at every level, so that you are attacking that individual from all sorts of, of areas and multiple messages at multiple points. So, for example, at the Pulse Polio campaign, messages for health workers were different from messages for family members, and messages for fathers were different from messages for mothers. One of the things that I'll just speak about in 2 seconds is using culture to change culture, which is very much in Breakthrough's DNA. How does that happen? So, for example, in Haryana, when a boy is born, people beat thalis in their homes to announce that a boy has been born. No such thing happens when a girl is born. In 2013, 2014, one of our colleagues, Sanjay, who has just gone through the Breakthrough training and joined our program in Haryana, had a niece born to him. And he beat the thali to announce the birth of his niece, the first one in his village to do that. So our community developers were so encouraged that they developed that action into a community intervention. So much so that in 2019, along with Beti Bachao Beti Padhao campaign in Haryana, we ran a month-long campaign called Thali Bajao campaign, which asked young people to celebrate the birth of their daughters. So at heart of Breakthrough is social behavior change campaigns. And I'm going to just share a very small clip with you so that you can get an idea of what a social behavior change campaign could be. One of the things that we often see is you are asked to behave in a way that you're not normally used to. And so, watch this to know what I'm.
ये टोन चेंज कर दो। क्यों मॉम? बदल दो। क्यों? क्योंकि रोज जब मैं ऑफिस जाती हूँ, कुछ लोग मुझे देखकर ऐसे ही सीटी मारते हैं। और मैं सीटियों से थक गई हूँ। Share your story with your son. Don't let what happened to you happen to another woman.
So, you don't generally share your stories of sexual harassment with your son, do you? So you're being asked to adopt a behavior which is not common to you. So this campaign reached about 15 million people without us spending a lot of money on it. It was picked up by many diverse media outfits, from Scoop Hook to the Queen to the Hindu to NDTV, and even now it keeps coming back. A week ago, somebody tagged me on Twitter with this campaign. So I'm going to leave a slide with some of the learnings of doing SBCC campaigns at scale, and I just want to say that it's very important to be able to talk about gender equity here, because if you do not, reach gender equity, you will not be able to reach at least 11 of the 17 SDG goals in 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sohini. I think should we leave the slide up here for a moment, or? We can move on. So far, we've heard about the role of technology, data, and behavior change in creating impact at scale. And fittingly, as the last piece of the puzzle, our next speaker is Gaurav Goel, who will be speaking about the importance of good governance. Gaurav is the founder and CEO of Samagra. Samagra is a mission-driven governance consulting firm that works with the political and bureaucratic leadership across states to solve the most complex governance challenges facing the country today. Gaurav holds a dual degree in computer science and engineering from IIT Delhi and an MBA from IIM Calcutta.
Did we just lose Devanshi?
Seems like. Yeah, I think so. I think we have.
You can complete the introduction then.
So maybe I can carry on her behalf. So welcome Gaurav. Welcome to the session. And to introduce Gaurav is a graduate from IIT Delhi and IIM Calcutta. And after graduating from IIM Calcutta, Gaurav was working at McKinsey & Company as a consultant. And while he was enjoying his work over there was a passion within him to do something for society at scale. And that is when in 2012, he decided to quit McKinsey and start Samagra Transforming Governance, which, as Devanshi mentioned, is a mission-driven governance consulting firm which works with government to create impact at scale. Gaurav will be speaking about creating impact at scale through good governance. Gaurav, over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Devanshi. Thanks, Mukund. I'm very, very happy to be here and speaking to all of you today. I'm representing Samagra. The core thesis at Samagra is better governance as a lever to create large-scale impact. While we are completely agnostic to the domain that we work in, and we work across domains such as education, health, service delivery, agriculture, skilling, employment linkages, and so on and so forth. But we have fixed our lever of change, and that is governance. And what I'm going to talk about today is, it's not so much about why work with government, because I think this is an audience which kind of understands the value and the importance of doing that. What I'm going to share, based on learnings of the last 9 years, are 5 principles of how to engage with governments. That's what I'll try to share today. I'm calling it the Panch Sutras of engaging with governments. At Samagra, we have Panch Sutras for everything, a lot of Panch Sutras. This one is around, at a macro level, how does one engage with the government? There are, of course, a lot of nitty-gritties in terms of day-to-day working with the government, but I'll keep it macro for the purpose of this discussion. The first learning, or the first Panch Sutra here is, enter only when there's a strong pull. Right, as professionals who kind of really deeply care about impact, especially as young professionals, we get very excited when we see the possibility of impact. Right, you work in a particular state, on a particular domain, there's a huge possibility of creating impact. There's so many beneficiaries and so on. But what I'm saying here is, and what we have done over the years, is not the possibility of impact that matters, it's the probability of impact. What are the chances of converting that possibility into real impact on the ground? And that's where the situation has to be set up for success. And one of the ways and one of the key ingredients of a setup for success is a strong pull from the government towards that reform, towards that transformation. And in our case, we defined a strong pull as 2 things. One, there has to be a committed and driven bureaucrat who wants to do that reform, who wants to run with it, and should have a mandate at the political level. In the state, it means at the chief minister's level. So once these two combination is there, that's when a strong pull, we say there's a strong pull and there's a high chances that the possibility of impact would become a reality. And how do we really measure this pull? How do you get to know? How do you assess whether the pull is there or not? And it can vary in different settings. In our case, there are three things. One, we generally don't make the first move. We don't go to a government and say, this is what can be done, that's what can be done. Instead, we let the government or the bureaucrat to reach out and say, this is what we want to do, can someone help with it? Right? So that itself is a demonstration of pull. Now, even once that happens, we don't kind of grab the opportunity with both hands. We'll usually kind of say, ki, nahi ho payega, right? There are many things that are required to really make it happen. It requires a certain commitment of your time. It requires certain resources, certain budgets, certain partnerships. It requires time from the chief minister. It requires 10 other things, right? Idea is almost like you're trying to scare away the person. But of course, that's not the idea. Idea is you're not wanting to scare away. You're just making it real as to what will it take to make that reform really happen. If the person still is there, still wants to do it, and still is committed to it, then that means there's a strong pull. So that's the second thing that we will do. And in our case, third, we also put the onus of figuring out funding for our own fee also on the government, right? So that's again a test of pull. So various ways in which you basically ascertain what's the level of commitment on behalf of the government to really undertake that and walk that path. And if there's that strong pull, then the setup of success is good, and that's when we enter. So that's the first learning. The second learning is to be a real thought partner to the government and speak up, right? Now, this is easier said than done. A lot of, at least our team members are 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds. How do you really be a thought partner with a senior bureaucrat who's much more than you in terms of experience, in terms of maybe credentials, and is in a position of authority? So it's easier said than done. But the learning again has been that two mindsets or two things really help in this to be able to speak up. And again, you don't want to speak up for the sake of speaking up. You want to speak up in the interest of the impact that you want to achieve and do it thoughtfully. But two things help. One, the mindset of the impact being important and not the project, right? At the back of the mind, you need to know that you're very happy to walk away from the project at any point in time, right? So it's not the project or the program or that engagement is not important. What you're trying to achieve through that is important. And that has to be an internalized and deep thing. It cannot be for the sake of speaking. It has to be internalized. So that helps. And second, of course, you have to back up any speaking up, and with senior bureaucrats, with chief ministers and so on, with a lot of backup and a lot of kind of credibility and a lot of being on top of content. So if you know your stuff, if you know what you're talking about, you have the backup, then it becomes easier to speak up. But it's very important in the interest of being able to create that large scale impact that you're looking at, that we act as thought partners and speak up wherever needed. The third learning over the years has been to be a catalyst and avoid being hands and legs to the government. Now, the unfortunate reality is that 95% of people outside of the system who end up working with the government, a lot of times end up becoming hands and legs to the government. There's nothing wrong in that per se, right? It's not something that's bad to do. It's just that the government already has so many hands and legs, right? There's no way any private entity, any private setup can augment that in a meaningful way or can really have a parallel system. It doesn't make sense to do that. It will never match the scale of the government in terms of people, right? So the real value add is when you can catalyze the system such that the existing hands and legs and minds in the government, they are working more effectively, right? So that whole mindset of being a catalyst and not doing the work that the government ought to be doing is extremely important and helps. So that's the third learning. The fourth learning over the year has been that it's extremely important to manage the environment. And what do I mean by managing the environment? Let's say you're working with one department with some bureaucrat. It's important to keep the leadership of the associated departments also aligned. It's important to keep the boss of that bureaucrat aligned. It's important to keep the chief minister's office aligned, keep the chief minister on your side, right? Bunch of partners that might be working. All of managing all of that becomes extremely, extremely important because that provides that air cover under which a lot of reform, a lot of transformation can really happen, a lot of meaningful work can happen. Otherwise, things will keep coming, which will keep disturbing the stuff that you're trying to achieve. Now, the question is, how do you manage the environment? Various things. Again, some examples. So sometimes it could be the packaging of the work that you're doing. The actual work is what it is, but how do you position it, package it such that it becomes important for other stakeholders as well. Right? Sometimes it could be just having quick and frequent kind of launches. Nobody has the patience in the government to say, okay, 3 years and some grand system would come and something would change. No, the thumb rule we follow at Samagra is a launch every 6 months. Right? So every 6 months we keep on launching. That keeps the political leadership at least kind of aligned to a large extent. Share a lot of credit. Don't take credit, share credit. So all of these are ways in terms of ways to kind of manage the environment. Very important to do that. The last and the fifth learning, I would say, think of sustainability and think it early. Right? The real test of the impact that one is able to create through government is once you have moved out after 2 years, after 3 years, after 5 years, whatever the duration might be. After moving out and you take 3 years from then, how many of the things that happened are still sustaining? That's the real test of impact. And getting things to become sustainable is never easy. So it's important to think about it early in the journey and not say that let's do everything and in the last 6 months when we're moving out, let's think about sustainability. Some doesn't work, right? Obviously, you may want to in the beginning demonstrate a lot of things and may not be from day one that there is sustainability, or fairly early in the journey, sustainability and the thinking around that has to come in. So these are the Panch Sutras in some sense, basis our learning over the years, or the last 9 years of engaging with governments. So entering only when there's a strong pull, which means that it's set up for success. That means the probability of converting the possibility of impact into reality is high. Second, be a real thought partner to the leadership on the government side. Speak up when required, and this requires a mindset of the impact being more important than that engagement, and a lot of credibility in terms of content. Third, be a catalyst, avoid being hands and legs. One cannot kind of really augment the government bandwidth or the government, the people in the government. It's about getting them to work more effectively. And that's why playing the role of a catalyst is very important. Fourth, manage the environment. It'll provide the air cover to kind of really push through a lot of reforms. Otherwise, disturbances will keep happening. And fifth, think sustainability and think about it early. So with that, I'll just stop here and happy to take any questions around working with the governments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gaurav, and apologies everybody again for briefly dropping off. Gaurav was our last speaker for this round, and so what we're going to enter now into is a round of question and answers with the audience. I have some questions already that have come in. If anybody has any more that they would like to address to a specific speaker or just have overall for the panel, please put them in the Q&A box over here and I'll take them. Shobhini, we're going to start with you because I realize that you have to leave soon. Our first question is from Saloni. She asks, randomized evaluations certainly do have an advantage as a method for evidence generation. However, given that they can be both costly and time intensive, are there other methods organizations in the social sector can use to report impact persuasively?
Devanshi, sorry to interrupt. That's for Shobhini, and Sohini will have to leave earlier.
Oh, Sohini has to leave earlier. I apologize.
It's all right, Devanshi, you've asked, and so Shobhini, you can go. No problem.
Sohini, I'll come to you right after.
Thanks, Devanshi. So thanks, Sohini, as well. I appreciate this. So this is a question I get asked very often, believe it or not. I guess you can believe it. The reason for me to focus on sort of talking about, I did talk about RCTs, but there's a whole different range, many ranges of methods, I think, that the other methods that exist in the ecosystem. And for me, I think the most important is actually the way to answer this or think about this is what is the question that you're asking? And the method is going to lend itself to that answer, to answering that question. So you choose the method based upon the question. If you're looking at causality and causal impact, and you're basing very large policy decisions and putting in tons of money into creating an impact. And if there is a way to be able to randomize, and I don't want to get into technicalities, but you want to be able to randomize the rollout to create that effective comparison group, then I think the RCT is a more effective tool to be able to employ. It also gives you external validity. It gives you sort of cost effectiveness. You can generalize to other contexts. And I've talked about a little bit about generalizing as the last 2 or 3 minutes. So sort of drawing from the global evidence. But having said that, there are, the most popular method, for instance, would be, the closest method is natural experiments, where you automatically get that comparison group naturally. There are very interesting ways to construct that, but a lot of organizations actually use pre and post. And that is an effective way to understand in that cohort what is the impact. But you will not be able to then understand what would have happened in the absence of the program. If that question is not important to you, you don't need to ask that. But I would argue that if where it's possible to ask that question, you do want to look at what is the true impact of your program, so you don't underestimate or overestimate the true impact of your program. We've seen that some things don't work. You want to be able to see, compare it with things that work as well. So just a quick example, drawing from the education example I was giving about learning outcomes, the pedagogy that I talked about, we actually have now looked at a cross section of that pedagogy being implemented and delivered by government school teachers, compared that with volunteers, and comparing that with not having that pedagogy at all. And interestingly, a combination of school teachers and volunteers working together to deliver that pedagogy. So, and very interesting lessons where we found that when you put the volunteers and teachers together, it's the volunteers who are doing all the work. So the impacts are being driven by the volunteers. But you would not be able to find this out if you had not sort of compared it with a comparison group. And that's where I would say the RCT methodology is helpful to be able to sort of compare those. So I'm not, I would say that it really depends on what that question that you're asking. And many times we are faced with challenges, especially with governments, where it's difficult to be able to randomize. They're in a hurry. They want to roll out. Pilot is very difficult. So in those situations, I absolutely know we don't want to stop the progress. So I hope I've answered that.
You have. Thank you so much. Sony, I'll come to you, and there are two questions. The first is, what is the most important ingredient, do you think, while preparing a recipe for behavior change campaigns so that they can be tastier for a larger population and have long-term impact?
I can't say it's one. I'll say it's, maybe three. The first thing that is very, very important is as an insight into human behavior. What makes people do things differently? Because what's in it for the people? You're asking a mother to share her story of sexual harassment with her son. What's in it for the mother? What's that insight into human behavior? How do you think this is going to help her? So that's the first ingredient. The second ingredient is consistency. You have to run this over a long period of time. You have to bring everybody together on a same kind of a platform. You have to be consistent in what you are saying. So you pick that human insight, you create a message, you stick with it for years. That's what Pulse Polio was all about. Do Bund Zindagi, you stick to that for a long period of time. And partnerships, because, at the end of the day, media or any kind of media intervention is expensive. NGOs do not have that, so a partnership with a government is a great thing. How did Breakthrough reach 243 million? It was a very small NGO at that point of time. It was because it partnered with the government of India, and we used all the Doordarshan channels to reach into the corners of villages. So partnerships are key in here. So those are the three ingredients, I would say, the most important ones. And evidence. I cannot tell you the role that evidence plays in SBCC campaign, right at the beginning, in the middle, as well as in the end. Keep testing, see what works.
Thank you. And that was a question from Rajneesh, in case I missed mentioning. Our next question, Sohini, for you is from Avi. And the question is, where and how do you see technology playing a role in behavior change? And what barriers do you see in employing technology for the same?
So technology plays a huge role in terms of, and now, with the mobile phone, sending messages out to a large number of people through WhatsApp groups is very easy, as we've seen. Disinformation too, misinformation too, but also right information. Again, it's not expensive. You can plan it to do it really well. The challenge as well with everything like this is connectivity. Do people have access to smartphones? The people that you really, really want to reach, do they have connectivity in their villages? Otherwise, technology is a wonderful way of actually reaching millions of people. We are working in Punjab with the school system, and we've seen, how platforms and parents are actually connecting on platforms and on mobile phones to talk about why their children are not in school. So it's possible to do that.
Fantastic, thank you. Our next question is for Shankar. It's from Sujandana. The question is, digital technologies are reorganizing education in ways that make access more inequitable in an already unequal society, especially in the context of the pandemic. For instance, surveys conducted by NCRT, ASAR, and Oxfam suggest that between 27% and 60% of people could not access online classes for a range of reasons, from a lack of devices, lack of internet connection, inability to buy data packs, etc. How can we bridge this gap?
Excellent question. The analogy I would like to give is, if you're using a binoculars and you're looking at it from the wrong end, everything will appear very, very far. So when you look at technology from the lens of devices and connectivity, you're looking at it from the wrong side of the binoculars. The right way to look at it is figure out what is that problem or the set of problems we want to solve. Figure out how are people trying to solve it now. And in the social sector, there is one temptation I've seen a lot of people fall into. Focus on what is not there. Devices are not there, connectivity is not there. But at Ekstep, as we are thinking about how to design for scale, we also started with what is there in abundance. We have teachers in abundance, textbooks in abundance, and a lot of children going to schools, thanks to the efforts of the previous generations. Now, teachers have devices, right? So a second useful principle of designing is what at Ekstep we call as +1 thinking, which is with what exists, how can you make the slightest change in the system to create an impact? Now, that impact may not solve the problem, but it makes an irreversible dent in it. Coming back to the question, the devices need not be in the hands of every child and parent. If the teacher has a device and can access better content on how to teach, she can use the blackboard and become a better teacher. It's not solving learning outcome problem. Let me give you another example. In Gujarat, they have a process by which once a week, the children are given a formative test throughout. During pandemic, obviously this could not happen in schools. So the teachers would go house to house, pick up their answer sheet, mark them, and then an artificial intelligence-based app was provided to the teachers, which would automatically convert it and digitize the marks. Teachers could make corrections. So within a week, the state would get data on learning levels of each of the 35 lakh children, on each of the concepts being assessed at the level of a school, cluster, block, district. Now, imagine what the state can do with it. Does this solve any problem? Not really, except the problem of the learning levels are now visible, right? And now the state can see, when it sees, it can start to solve problems. So I'll end with that. Technology has a role. It adds to human capabilities. Which human, in what system, in what context is a question. And so here's another way. Even if devices and connectivity were there provided everywhere, will our learning levels improve? Not a chance.
Thank you. Thank you, Shankar, for that. I think that was a very important distinction to draw. Our next question is for Gaurav. It's from Sharika. And the question is, how do you keep up with the goal of civil society development or social justice and the agendas that people in power come up with? How do you manage both? And how does the Panchsutra work in this regard?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I think this is some variation of this we get asked pretty often, which is how do you work with the agendas of people in power and the different ideologies that they may have and so on and so forth. The way at least we look at it is that 90%, I'm just putting a rough number out there, but a large part of governance that happens is actually ideology neutral. So the fact that every student should learn and be able to do basic arithmetic and should be able to read, there's no ideology in that. The fact that we should enable more income for the farmers, there's no ideology in that. The fact that we should get our driving license in time, there's no ideology in that. So large part of governance is actually ideology neutral. But of course, what gets debated, what gets discussed in media and otherwise is the remaining 10-20% which actually gets driven by ideology. And that's like, so that's where the debate really is. But a large part of it, there's no debate. And that's really the space that we are operating in. So we don't really need to worry excessively about this thing and get ideologically stuck there. I think a large part of what we are doing and 100% of what we are doing, a large part of what happens in governance is actually neutral to ideology. The second thing to just, as another concept, that mindset to just keep, at least the mindset that we keep is, let's not also impose our kind of ideologies on the governments that we are working with, right? In the sense that, of course, unless something is blatantly wrong, generally they'll not involve people like us in that. But also trust the wisdom of the people who kind of elected those governments, and not kind of put ideology as individuals kind of into let that come in the way, right? And I think the first part of it takes care of large, almost 100% of what we do.
Thank you, Gaurav. Sony, since we still have you here, can I ask you another question that's come in?
Yeah.
Thank you. It's actually from somebody who's chosen to remain anonymous. The question is, how effective and speedy are behavior change campaigns to create impact?
Just by leaving a piece of media out there is not going to actually change behaviors. So you have to actually focus on a 360-degree campaign. In our parlance, we call it 360-degree campaign, is when you are actually focusing on activities that are taking place on ground along with the media messages. SBCC campaigns are very important to actually look at human behaviors, get that incisive actually point to create your messages. That message has to be taken to the people through various channels, and not all of them can be SBCC. Some of them will actually have to be community mobilization. So we, in Breakthrough, we actually put three things together: a community mobilization, leadership development of the young people, and 360-degree campaigns to actually make that behavior change possible. But there are SBCC campaigns alone which have been able to change behaviors for a large period of time. For example, smoking in the US. But it has taken a long time. So having 2-3 other strategies to actually support the SBCC will have to be key.
Thank you. And just to marry to that question, something from Asim, which is, how can Bollywood or regional media industries be roped in to change deep-rooted behaviors, given the large number of people who get influenced by our movie stars?
Difficult. Working with celebrities has its own pros and cons. For example, from gender equity point of view, Bollywood is so full of macho ways of looking at masculinity. Until and unless you actually are portraying alternative, examples of masculinity, it's very difficult for us to actually bring in Bollywood into the mix. There are interesting films being done, but they're all small. What we have to do is actually talk with writers' tables, producers' offices, the whole OTT platform, where you can actually make sense, where you can actually go and talk about something that will be mainstream, but will not be, a Salman Khan beating up, goons at the roadside. It's very important to bring in celebrities, but what, their social persona and their screen persona sometimes can be at a combating level.
Thank you so much for that.
Devanshu got muted again.
Thank you very much, Sohini. Shobani, the next question is for you. It's from Rajneesh. And the question is, there's a lot of discussion around the availability of caste census data in India. Do you think that having it is going to help reduce poverty, or would it lead to further discrimination based on caste in the country?
Thanks, Devanshi. I'm happy for others to answer this because it's a more general question, I think, around sort of, looking at caste as one of the indicators. One thing I'll say in terms of collecting data on any indicator, it's really what do you want to use it for? What is the outcome that you're hoping to get out of collecting that data? And that's a very important question we ask ourselves each time that we're collecting any indicator. So, it's a common phrase you might have heard that what is not measured does not get done, or something like that. But I will also say that it's equally important to ask that question when you're measuring who is going to lose out, if that based upon that measurement or based upon what you're measuring. Looking at the caste census, I think what it requires is not just collecting the data, but it requires an overhaul of our government policies to ensure justice and equality, equity, to truly help increase representation. So not just lip service, but truly help increase representation through different affirmative action programs. There are quite a few that are caste-based affirmative action programs, and it really depends. I think without hard data, it's difficult to create these progressive policies, but it's ultimately you have to trust the system, and that's the most important piece here. Is it's how who is collecting that data? How are you seeing that it's being utilized by the end user? And it's if we trust the system, if we trust the person who's collecting the data and formulating policies, then it's probably going to help in creating increasing representation across in diverse things like workplace and education institutions and all of that. But it can also sort of backfire. I don't have a clear answer to this, unfortunately, Devanshi.
That's okay. Thank you for answering it. And I'll just wait for a second to see if somebody else wants to jump in before moving on to our other questions. Okay. Our next question is for Gaurav. It's from Arun. And the question is, do you think organizations like yours have a role in driving behavior change within the government? Or should you avoid trying to educate the government, as it may be counterproductive and risks the potential impact that you may otherwise have?
I would say behavioral change or change management is a key element of the work that we do with the government. Right? There's nothing sustainable, systemic that is possible without an element of behavioral change inside the government also. It's a massive workforce. There's such a large kind of number of people, officials in the government. Any change requires that. The question is, how do you do that and how do you bring about that change? If you were to compare it, take it from a corporate analogy, then you have a lot of levers that can be leveraged to kind of get people to behave in a certain way or incentivize them, hire, fire, incentive, financial incentives, bonus, all of that. None of that is basically available in the government, and therefore the challenge is that much more complex. And one has to really kind of look for non-financial levers, incentives inside the government to kind of bring about those changes. And that's what we have tried to kind of learn over the years. Just to give you one quick example, when we're trying to kind of bring about education learning outcome improvements in Haryana, we set up this almost a gamification or competition in the state, where we had some 119 education blocks in the state, and we wanted all of them to achieve certain learning outcomes. And we said, whoever kind of gets there and they believe they've gotten there can raise their hand. A third party would come and do an independent assessment in that block. And it was actually found that the outcomes have been met. This block and all the officials there would be kind of really facilitated, and it would be celebrated, and it'd be out there, press conference for them and so on. So there's a certain way we try to bring about a non-financial incentive there. Also a sense of competition amongst different blocks and so on. So these are just one example, but many such ways to kind of get behavioral change going inside the government. But it's very, very important. The other way to do that is through technology. Right? You actually bring about a change through technology in a manner that the old ways of doing things no longer exist. So it's not something that one can fall back on and various other such things, but very, very important core part of the work that we do.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Gaurav. I want to do a quick check. Mukund, are we out of time for this Q&A round?
We are, but do we have like some important question remaining? We are actually out of time, but maybe I think there is one question.
Sorry?
Is there any important question remaining? Devanshi, we are actually out of time, but if there's some burning question.
Oh, I mean, I don't want to play like a judge here for the ranking of the questions based on importance. So I think if we're out of time, then that should be okay. I'll just one quick sentence to say, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I know we've missed Sohini, but Gaurav, Shobhini, Shankar, thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights in this session. It was extremely insightful for me as well, and I'm sure for our audience. And Mukund, thank you for all the help with organizing it and ensuring that people stayed on time and helping me stay on track as well. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Devanshi. Really amazing. Thanks so much for moderating, and thank you so much, Shankar, Gaurav, Shobhini, and Sohini, and all the amazing participants, our ISDM staff members, ISDM students, and everyone who's joining us on our social media platforms. Thank you so much for attending this session. Hope you got some great insights. And just to let you know that at 4 p.m. we are going to start our next two sessions. The first session is on diversity matters. We have a keynote address by Ms. Vrinda Saroop, who's the former Education Secretary, Government of India, followed by a panel discussion. And then we have a panel on philanthropy matters, wherein we have a keynote address by Mr. Sunil Khan Munjal, who's the chairperson of Hero Enterprises. Hope you will make to both these sessions too. And it was great to host you this Saturday morning. Thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to seeing you at 4 p.m. Thank you so much. Thanks, Devanshi. Thanks to all the speakers, participants, staff members, and students. Bye-bye.
Thanks.